Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
We're hyper-focused on cross-border transactions and payments. That is what we are built for. We're built for asset issuance. We're built for being able to provide this kind of ease of use and this seamless opportunity for one asset to get to another geography and to be converted into the local asset. So that's what Stellar's focus is.
That was Denelle Dixon, the CEO and Executive Director of the Stellar Development Foundation, and this is episode 42 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and Denelle is our special guest this week. I'm your host, Greg Myers, and hey, before we get started, if you happen to office in Houston, Austin, or North Texas, check out Fuse Workspace, where their mission is to help others do more. Check them out at fuseworkspace.com. Okay, back to the show. Before joining Stellar, Denelle served as the COO of Mozilla. During her tenure there, she led the organization's business, revenue, and policy teams, including the ongoing fight for net neutrality. A lawyer by trade, Denelle previously served as a general counsel and legal advisor in private equity and technology. The Stellar Development Foundation is a nonprofit and a non-stock entity that focuses on shepherding the code base for the Stellar Network, which is an open source global decentralized network, very similar to the underpinnings of the internet. Think blockchain, but without the history or challenges that some people might think exist with blockchain. Stellar is hyper-focused on making money fluid, so people all over the world who don't have a bank account can, for example, use their mobile phone to make payments or send money anywhere in the world. Denelle provides several use cases that help bring their mission to life. This is a fascinating episode about a part of payments we don't necessarily talk about very much. So let's get started. Hi, Denelle. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Hi, Greg. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive right in. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
I grew up in a small town south of Silicon Valley in California called Gilroy. It's the garlic capital of the world. It's what we used to call ourselves. And then most of my family still lives down there. I obviously went to high school there, and then I went to college at the University of California at Davis and loved it. It was very similar to my hometown, rural and fun. And then I took a few years off, and then I went to law school at UC Hastings, University of California, Hastings, which is in the city. I currently live in the Bay Area. I live in the East Bay, and we have 5 boys, ranging from 11 years old to 20 years old. So we have a lot of fun in this house.
Wow, 5 boys. So I have 3 girls. So 5 boys. I'm sure you stay super busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it keeps you. Sometimes you feel real old and sometimes you feel young. So it just depends on the moment, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. Well, great. Well, let's talk about Stellar Development Foundation. Tell us exactly what you do. And just, I'm just going to preface it with, typically we're talking to payments companies that are ISOs or acquirers or something to do specifically around payments, fraud, security, that kind of stuff. So this one's going to be a little different, but I'm really looking forward to it. I think our audience is really going to like it, but I don't want to spoil the punchline. I'm going to let you tell what you guys do, and then we'll have some follow-on questions from there.
Great. So the Stellar Development Foundation, it's a nonprofit, non-stock entity that's really focused on shepherding the code base for the Stellar Network. And the Stellar Network is an open source, decentralized network that it becomes a platform for entities like the normal folks that you talk to be able to build on top of. And the notion behind it is that it's creating this global, decentralized network, very similar to the underpinnings of the internet in terms of how that works, that allows for easy compliance tools for folks who build on it so that you can issue assets on the Stellar Network. Assets, for example, fiat-backed assets. We have a USD token. USDC is going to be part of the Stellar community. We just recently announced that. We have gold-backed assets. We have silver-backed assets. There's a Naira backed asset. There's just so many of them, it's hard to describe them. But these assets are one-to-one. And so you can it takes a string of code to issue an asset on Stellar. And then you can utilize that asset to really focus on cross-border transactions. So we are hyper-focused on one thing, and that is just making it simple, making money fluid so that we can open markets and that we can have people all over the world who right now don't have access, for example, to traditional bank accounts that some of us might be used to. They can do it from their mobile phone and they can send a payment from their account in Nigeria, for example, and they can send it over to Europe and it can get there in 3 to 5 seconds. And so we work on the underpinnings of the network, and then folks that you normally talk to are the ones that build on top of it to make all this innovation and creativity and to make it all happen fast.
Okay. Can you give like a real world example of how a traditional payments company might use the platform?
Sure. I'll give you an example so if you think we have these things they're called anchors, they're financial institutions. And so the network is this decentralized network, as I mentioned. But on the edges, you have these financial institutions that are just like some of them are payments companies. Some of them are companies that are focused on, they can help individuals pay their local PG&E, for example, or whatever electricity company you have in your area. So these companies are financial institutions governed by the regulations in their region. One really good example, it's an active payment corridor right now, is I mentioned the Naira asset. So we have a company called Cowrie in Lagos, Nigeria, and they've issued an asset that's called the Naira, and it's NGNT. And that asset they have companies that are their customers, and they want to be able to send a payment from Lagos, Nigeria to, we'll use Europe, for example. So these companies that they work with, and they worked with them before on the traditional payment rails that we're all used to, but now they actually have created a corridor between Nigeria, and then there's another company in Europe called Tempo, and they've issued a Euro T asset. So it's a Euro-backed asset. So these assets are sitting one for one. So in the Naira case, and for every NGNT that's issued, there's a Naira in the bank account for Cowrie. And so this company, what it does for its clients is they'll say, I want to get this payment made to this entity in Europe, for example. So Cowrie will be able to take the Naira out of their customer's account, convert it to a digital asset, the NGNT, send that over Stellar to Tempo, who will then convert that into the local currency there, so the euro, and will put it into the bank account of the entity that the customer from Nigeria was paying. So it's a really simple payment mechanism, and it takes 3 to 5 seconds to complete the transaction.
Okay, so are there other use cases or benefits beyond, say, sort of the cross-border capability?
Well, if you think about the cross-border capability, like that's just from the standpoint of commercial entities. But think about the individuals. We have this entity called Saldo. Saldo is actually an asset issuer in Mexico. So they are an anchor in Mexico. They've issued an asset that's backed by the Mexican peso. But their business model is a little different. You can have a wallet that also is built on the Stellar network. And if you take let's just say that I live here in the US and I wanted to send money to my family in Mexico, I could load my fiat currency into my wallet, convert it into a digital asset, and then send that to Saldo, or using Saldo's wallet. And then Saldo will convert it into the Mexican peso, also a digital asset in the wallet there. And then they'll be able to use that to pay for the services. You think about electricity or the phone bills or all of these things so that you can do that. Or you could send it to your family member directly. But if you use Saldo, you'd be using Saldo to pay those services. It's a pretty remarkable piece of technology that can be used for, if you think about any kind of payment. And we're focused on cross-border because the mission of the Stellar Development Foundation is really to create that equitable access to the global financial system. There's so many things that we take for granted, especially where I sit here in the Bay Area, that we have banks right down the street. Well, that's just not the case for everywhere. It's not as hard to get bank accounts if you have IDs. Well, not everyone has all of those things that they can actually prove up to get the bank accounts. But when you create a digital wallet that's built on Stellar or that integrates with Stellar, you can actually do all of these transactions very seamlessly and simply so that everyone can take advantage of these things that we take for granted.
Gotcha. Okay. And how do you, when I say make money, how do you bring in revenue to operate the foundation?
Right. So when the Stellar network was created, there's a digital asset. It's called the Lumen. That is the currency that actually, it's the fuel that runs the network, meaning that every transaction, in order to ensure that there's not DDoS and spam. So it's the native asset that actually you pay a fraction of a lumen for each transaction. So this is like 100,000th of a lumen, which is like far less than a penny because lumens right now are worth about 7 cents or so for each transaction. So those native assets that sit on the network, they were created at the outset when the network itself was created. Some of those were set aside specifically for the foundation to be able to utilize for it to sustain itself and to continue to grow. So we generate revenue by selling those assets in the open market. And we use what we call our treasury to be able to sustain Stellar and the work that we do for Stellar, but also the Stellar Development Foundation. We don't have shareholders, so we're nonprofit, non-stock. We don't have shareholders. We just really are beholden to the mission. And so that is our hyper focus. It's just that equitable access to the global financial system.
Okay. And how do you market or sell, or how do you get the word out to these companies that want to build on this network?
It's a great question. It's network effects are really hard, right? If you think about building an ecosystem and building a decentralized network, so you have to have a lot of people who understand and care about the same mission, or at least value the mission enough that they want to be able to support the cause. We have folks that are part of this decentralized network all over the world to create it. And they do it because they're either supportive of the mission itself, or they find that there's a reason why they themselves want to be able to build on Stellar and to support the network itself so that they can make their business operate more seamlessly, for example. One of the things that's really important for SDF, and we call it a pillar for us, is to be able to have folks out there know Stellar and frankly understand blockchain technology just so that they feel comfortable with it. So one of our pillars and one of the key things that we focus on is becoming the blockchain and being the blockchain that people know and trust. Because blockchain technology has a history, it has background, people have their own perspectives, people think that blockchain is a challenge. And it's actually quite simple because it's just an open ledger, essentially. So we focus a lot on making sure that we're an open source project. And so everything that we do is in the open and transparent. So we have a really phenomenal documentation so that you can really easily build on top of Stellar. We also have a marketing team that's focused on not just marketing the network, but also focused on marketing those entities that build and are successful on the network. And so we spend a lot of time trying to create those network effects so that we can build this healthy, vibrant ecosystem. So I've been here for about a year and a half now, and the amount of growth that we've had in the ecosystem just during my time here is phenomenal. And just to see these open and active corridors and to see transactions happening and be very vibrant on the network is just a really fascinating and just a wonderful thing to see the growth. So the notion of marketing, not just for the Stellar network, but also for the individual use cases, there are so many. There's one I'll tell you about because I think it's just really interesting. It's a company called D-Stock. And the point of D-Stock is to allow people all over the world to be able to be a part of the financial structure that's focused on blue chip stock, for example. So before, it was really hard and impossible, for example, if you lived in Vietnam, to actually own any interest in Apple or, let alone a fractional interest in an Apple, like part of Apple stock. And D-Stock allows you from your phone to be able to use these digital assets and to be able to acquire blue chip stock. And you can do a fractionalized interest, or you can own the whole piece of the whole amount of stock. And you can do that from your phone. And part of that, the phone part is so important because it's that equitable access, because not everyone has access to the computers that some people take for granted. And so these are the things that Stellar allows you to do. And so we focus on companies like D-Stock and show what they're doing and work with them to create marketing around their products so that we could then bring others to the network to create this really vibrant ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a fascinating example. Do you have competitors?
Sure, there are networks that are competitive, I think, to ours. There are other open networks. The key differentiator for us, and there are lots of other players trying to build in blockchain, and I think that blockchain technology offers not just really interesting work in payments, but it also offers a really interesting ability to, if you just want to track goods and services and you want to do it on an open platform, you can do that on some other networks are very well set up for that. There's just a lot of opportunity and use cases that blockchains out there offer. We're hyper-focused on cross-border transactions and payments. That is what we are built for. We're built for asset issuance. We're built for being able to provide this kind of ease of use and this seamless opportunity for one asset to get to another geography and to be converted into the local asset. So that's what Stellar's focus is. And there are other networks out there that have a focus on payments, but also have other focus areas that they're intending to build into. But from our standpoint, we are engaging with regulators to try to make it so that not just Stellar, but that lots of other blockchains can be successful in this space. I look at this as interoperability is key. If we can interoperate to create this like very, very wide net and combine all of these efforts together, it would make a pretty awesome system.
Yeah, it really aligns with your, high level mission.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I typically ask this question around what you think or where you think the payments industry is headed over the next couple of years, but maybe the right way to ask that is, where do you see what you're doing fit into payments over the next couple of years, and what are the trends and what do you expect to see, say, in 2 to 3 years?
It's such a great question because I think that there's just so much momentum behind the usefulness of these new technologies. And again, so what I see in the next 3 to 5 years is that we'll stop so much talking about the technology layer and we'll really, really talk about the use cases. There's going to be a big focus on UX design to make it simple. Because one of the things that happened just in the early days of the internet, I used to be the COO of Mozilla and I focused so much on web technologies and making sure the web was growing in an open and transparent way. And if I think about like what we did in the early days of the web is we really tried to focus on making things simple so that people felt comfortable making payments, for example, using web technology. But sometimes we got it wrong because we focused on the technology stack instead of just making it really simple. Because you don't need to convince someone that blockchain, for example, is the thing that they need. They frankly don't even need to know that blockchain is what the company that they're working with is utilizing. What they need to know is that their payment is they have to feel that they have to trust, feel safe, and know that their payment's going to get to where it wants to get to. And so I see in the next 3 to 5 years, I think there'll be a lot more focus on blockchain technology becoming very user-friendly. We're going to see, we already are seeing this today. For example, we built this application that's a wallet that's really focused on Argentinian market and focused on the ability to be able to hold a digital asset because it's the currency in Argentina, for example, is so volatile in terms of inflation. So if you take and you can just hold the digital asset you can hold in a USD backed asset. So you take your local currency, you can convert it into a USD backed asset and you can hold that. And then you don't have the impacts of inflation so much. That wallet that we built is really focused on solving that user problem. And it's very simple for the user to be able to engage with. You don't have to know that there's blockchain technology behind it. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see a lot more attention paid to the user and paid to solving problems instead of focused on this new and glorious technology stack. And I think that is going to really push the usefulness of everything that we do at Stellar and all the other folks out there that are building on blockchain. It'll push that usefulness and make it so that people are using this technology in a very similar way that we got used to using web technologies. We didn't care so much about the underlying stack. We just cared about getting something done. So I think that we're going to see that because of this, we'll see the payments industry head towards becoming so much more inclusive, regardless of your location. You'll be able to get access to these. We're not trying to supplant the existing infrastructure that exists. We're trying to enhance it and to make it all part and to interoperate. And I think we're going to see a lot of that happen. I also think that with respect to something that's probably going to be important for folks that you normally talk to is that we're going to see central banks get more involved in this. And they're quite likely going to issue digital currencies. And those digital currencies are going to, be available and movable very simply. And so the movement of money will become, or the movement of value, is the way I like to think about it, becomes much easier.
So are you already seeing central banks start to do that?
Yeah, there's central banks that are really engaged in, it's interesting, like just in this pandemic that we're in, we've seen more attention paid to blockchain technology because if you just look, we saw this in the Congress in the US when they were trying to get these payments out to individuals all over the country. And they found that it was really hard because they didn't always have the bank account information or the right information for the individuals. And so there became some talk about using digital rails to make this happen. And so that actually demonstrated a big hole and a need that could be filled by using blockchain technology. So you see more focus and more attention paid in lots of geographies, including the US, in what does a central bank digital currency look like? And how does a central bank engage with the private sector to be able to issue these assets? So we see it in Canada. You're already seeing something like this in China. You're seeing it in lots of countries in Europe and Asia where there's a keen focus on making the movement of value simple. And digital currencies actually really help you to do that. And central bank issued digital currencies, while there are issues because central banks don't normally have that consumer relationship or that relationship with the consumer, they normally have it with the financial institutions. And having a central bank digital asset would make it easy to have the relationship with the consumer, but it, creates lots of challenges. So I'm hopeful that what we'll see is that we'll see the central banks start to work with the private sector to be able to work with the private sector and issue these assets, and have the private sector have that similar relationship that banks have with individuals using central banks' digital currency.
Sure. You care to get the crystal ball out and guess what's going to happen 10 years from now?
What I hope will happen, I talk about our mission in terms of creating equitable access to the global financial system. And I talk about that as being a really, really big problem to solve. And I talk about the way I structure our business and organize our company. I organize it in 5-year increments. And so for us in 2025, one of the most amazing things that we could see happen is that Stellar is a global payment standard, so that you create this standard that everyone can interoperate with to make work. I hope that happens. And whether it's all Stellar or a combination, I think that would be just phenomenal to create those standards and to see this. I think 10 years from now, if we've done our part in terms of working with regulators to make sure that they're comfortable with the blockchain technology and all the regulations they already have with financial institutions out there, I think that we'll see that, while we have these borders, what we've learned, even just, let's just use the pandemic as an example, is the borders exist, right? Because we have these controlled borders all around the world. But the truth is that we're really just one global economy altogether. And if you think about how easy it is for things to flow over borders and that we all sort of are in this together, I see a more easy flow of value between these different geographies, certainly with regulation on the financial institutions within their geography. So the regulators will have control over what happens there. But I do hope that we'll see a reduction in fees for those individual consumers or those businesses that are trying to send money across to different countries, because I think that's part of it. And then the speed at which this happens will be a really important cost, and then efficiency will be a really important thing that we'll see in 10 years' time, I think. And I also feel like we're just going to be able to look at there won't be this dichotomy between those who have access to this infrastructure and those who don't. I think that we'll see that there'll be more equitable access, so that companies like DStock out there trying to create this opportunity to have access to something that you wouldn't historically have had, we're going to see more innovation in that space, so that bank accounts aren't going to feel so far away from someone who might live in the countryside outside of Lagos, Nigeria. You won't really need the bank account if you actually have a digital device, a mobile device, and you can transact and do these really important things for your family and for, frankly, the GDP for each of these countries over your mobile device. So I think we'll see more of that happen in the next 10 years if we really focus this right and make this digital system one that regulators can feel good about, which I think they should and can. And we really try to focus on the solution for users instead of the technology and enhancing that technology. We should always be making the technology better, but mostly you have to use technology to solve real problems. And so I think if we do that, everything's going to blow up in 10 years and be phenomenal for people.
Great. Fascinating concept, fascinating industry and company. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So tell us about your journey to your role there as the CEO and executive director.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting in terms of I started when I was in 3rd grade. I decided I wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer because I saw this woman on TV just in this role that was that I just wanted to be a trial lawyer as a result of it. And so my 3rd grade dreams, I did that, and I went to law school and I was a trial lawyer for 9 years, and I loved everything that I did. I loved being in the courtroom. I loved trying to lay the foundation and talk to people about with each fact so that they could actually make their own decision, but in the hopes that they went for the position that I was in. I thought it was a lot of fun. But I realized that business was really interesting to me. And I left the law firm and worked in technology on the legal and then also on the business side and in the tech sector. And then eventually I totally shifted gears and I went to work for a private equity firm because I didn't really have a lot of background and knowledge of how, private equity firms work, and certainly just thinking about acquiring businesses and just having the whole notion of what it looks like, what you try to look for when you're, looking at portfolio businesses and how you get investors to be a part of it. And that was just always fascinating to me. So my career's not linear at all. I did lots of different things to get to the place where I did that for several years. And then I came to Mozilla. And at Mozilla, I really wanted to get back into tech and to focus on the technology layer. I felt like I missed it a lot when I was doing the private equity work because we purchased companies all over the world, but we weren't focused on the tech stack, which to me was always like this. I loved learning about it at every level. And so I went to Mozilla and really then not just became like more and more attached to this notion of openness and open source projects and how you develop in the open and transparency. And really at Mozilla, what I learned and what I've brought so much to SDF is the idea that competition and innovation are so crucial and important out there, particularly when you're focused on technology. And so fighting for this open, transparent web was just so much of what I did. So I ran the business side and the revenue side at Mozilla, and I also focused on the policy. So I did this perfect intersection between policy and then business and products. And I loved the work that we did there because we were able to not just advocate for our products, but we were able to advocate for what would be good for the web as a whole. And so a lot of the things that I adopted in terms, I worked at Mozilla for 7 years in a variety of different roles, spending a lot of time on the tech stack and also understanding product and product innovation. And then Jed McCaleb, who's the founder of Stellar Network and SDF, he approached me. I thought, he reached out to me and we got introduced through a former colleague of mine. And Jed wanted someone to come over and take over the CEO role and the executive director role at SDF. And it was a big, big difference for me because I'd been working at a company which was much larger. But I had been focused on so many of the issues that SDF needed to focus on to be able to create those network effects and build an ecosystem. And so it all kind of worked. Jed and I spent many, many months talking about whether this was something that would make sense. And I loved the mission. I became at Mozilla more and more mission driven. That's what we were focused on, is just the open web. And I loved the mission and I loved the opportunity to try to build something and create something, which I think that we've done. Jed had already done like a really wonderful job of, and sort of taking that and moving it to the next level was my focus. And it's a fascinating journey for me. I used to always joke, like being a girl from Gilroy who no one in my family had gone to college. And my dad told me that if I just went to college one day, I would be doing something different than anybody else in our family. And then to be able to run this organization and to really be focused on things that matter, I think to humans in the world, is a pretty remarkable journey for me.
Yeah, it is. It's a remarkable journey for sure. So what are some things that you're passionate about? Maybe name one thing on the business side and one on the personal side.
I'm passionate on the business side about helping companies to achieve sustainability, because I feel like innovation for innovation's sake is just amazing in itself. But if you can take that and you can have these companies have sustainable business models that are true to what they want to do and that allow them to build and grow, it just creates more competition. And so that's what I spend a lot of time working with the businesses that build on Stellar to help them to get to, is how can we help to create, work with you to focus you in on what is your avenue for sustainability. Mostly just because I think it creates so much growth and so much opportunity. And I just love to work with people who are, they themselves are creators, because creators are very different than those folks that are sustainers. And I love that. So that's one thing on the business side. On the personal side, I love to learn, like just about whatever. Like I read a lot. I learn a lot from my kids. Like our kids, I just look at the next couple of generations, and I find it remarkable how they sort of set their sights on the world and think of the world very, very differently than we do. And so it's a journey. Like I used to, with my oldest son, I tried really hard to read everything he was reading so that we could talk about him. Like even there were sci-fi books that I wasn't necessarily the genre that I loved, but I loved being able to talk about the books and talk about the characters. And so I do a lot of reading for that, even with my 11-year-old now. So I guess I'm just passionate about learning, growing in that way.
Great. So you've got kids that are getting close to that age of getting out into the real world, so to speak. When I started in payments 15 years ago, you didn't get out of school and say, hey, I want to be in payments. I just kind of fell into it. So I'm interested to hear your advice for someone that's just coming out of school and they hear payments is this great industry, or fintech or blockchain, these kinds of things. I mean, what advice would you give them so that they could start their careers in, payments or fintech, that kind of area? What advice would you give them?
I think the most important thing and it crosses across all industries, but I think it's particularly important when you're dealing with fintech and in the payment space, is to focus on the user. Really think about the problems that whatever geography or region that you're in, try not to, one of the things that we're really good at in Silicon Valley is we sort of get this like Silicon Valley mindset, and we don't really recognize the problems that exist in other areas and we don't try to discover how to solve them. And so if I were, two of our boys are in college, and if they were going to be interested in doing something in this space after, I would say, think about the problems that exist out there. Maybe you don't encounter them, but others do. Think about those and think about solutions to solving those problems, because that is how you can be successful. And I define success as really creating an impact on humans. And if you think about it that way, and you're really solving those problems, and you're using technology to do it, there couldn't be a more fun space to be in, because technology and just the way it changes and grows faster than we can keep up with, and then using that growth and those changes to really solve real world problems for humans and when I say humans, I also mean businesses, right? Because what's behind the business, but the humans, that is the way to really create your impact on the world. And that's, I think, what ultimately we all feel better when we actually are impacting the world positively and not just out there trying to, it's not bad if people are generating revenue and opportunity for themselves as a result. But so long as there's like a benefit to the larger society, I think that you'll always hit that sweet spot if you think about it from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice. Well, we've covered a lot of ground so far, talking about Stellar and your career and a little bit about the industry. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Gosh, and just thinking about your audience, I think that I would just love to have anyone who's interested in what Stellar and blockchain generally can do to help. You can reach out. You can go to stellar.org. I think there's a wealth of information there around what we can do to help you to create what the solutions that you want to be able to bring to the world. But also, I just think it's a lot of fun to look at the different companies that are out there doing these really interesting and innovative things. So I guess I'll just make a pitch for that. But everything else, I think it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really grateful that you took the time to be able to go through this.
Yeah, that was great. It was great. Well, Denelle, thank you so much for being on the show. I know your time's very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, super fun. I love it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.